I'm super excited to be filming from the Olympic Stadium. It is such a great historical site that I can see in front of me, and I'm really excited to have spent a couple of days in Athens. If you're excited to learn a little bit more about the historical sites that the city has to offer and more about how I actually plan my trip, then keep on watching and let me know in the comments below if you're planning to visit Athens. Let's kick off at the Acropolis. It is an ancient citadel built on a high rocky hill in the center of Athens. It was constructed in the 5th century BCE during Athens' golden age. It was built to honor Athena, the city's patron goddess, and to serve as a symbol of the city's power and resilience after the Persian Wars. The temples and monuments here weren't just religious, they represented civic pride and the identity of Athens as a rising democracy. Now let's talk about the logistics. Getting tickets to the Acropolis Hill cost around 25 to 35 euros depending on what kind of package you buy. I personally bought the package where I could attend the museum as well as the Acropolis Hill. You get about a 1 hour slot, which gives you about 15-minute leeway each way, and depending on this you can access it at any point within that time frame and then spend as long as you want on the Acropolis Hill or the museum itself. So the Acropolis itself is made up of the Acropolis Hill, which has the Parthenon, which is probably the most famous monument on the hill, as well as the Erechtheion, the Propylaea, as well as the Theatre of Dionysus and the Herodion. So all of this actually does take quite some time to explore, especially if you are doing this independently and reading some of the signs. So if you're somebody that's looking for a lot more history as you explore, then I do recommend getting the guided tour, which is around 2 hours, and it costs around 60 euros. One thing to be mindful of is that the entire Acropolis site is quite large and it does take quite some time to go up to the top of the Acropolis Hill, explore, and then also spend some time in the museum that you can see in the clips. So I do recommend wearing appropriate shoes that have enough grip, as some of the marble areas can be quite slippery, and the ground itself is made of almost like a limestone, so it does get quite dusty. So I don't recommend wearing slippery sandals, and trainers are probably your best bet. Again, you can spend as long as you want in the Acropolis Museum as well as the entire Acropolis site. And I do recommend that you bring either a drink or buy this from any of the cafes that are around. I personally ended up going to the cafe within the museum itself, but because the day was quite hot, I really do recommend that you carry some sort of nourishment for yourself as you explore the grounds. As you can see from the clips itself, that the grounds does get quite busy, so trying to find a slot early morning is probably your best bet. Because if you do end up booking last minute, you might end up going for a slot 10 a.m, which is quite a popular one, and you might find that there are a lot more crowds than you expected. On the grounds you can also find the prison of Socrates, as well as some local restaurants nearby. I recommend the God's restaurant, which is something that I personally really enjoyed. One of my favourite things in Athens was actually visiting the Olympic Stadium. I ended up going around sunset time, which was so beautiful to just sit down, rest, and get a view of the Acropolis Hill and the city during sunset. And you can buy tickets as you arrive, and honestly the entire ground wasn't as packed as I was expecting. Perhaps it's because I went at dinner time, but this was definitely one of my favourite things in Athens. I'm currently filming from the Olympic Stadium that you can see behind me. I think this has definitely been one of my favourite things in Athens. Of course, second to the Acropolis, which is what I did this morning. It's been a really great close to the day, and the sun is starting to set, and it's been really great just walking across the stadium and listening to this audio guide that I have, which has been super interesting, just to learn a little bit more about the history of the stadium and a little bit more about the history of Athens as well. Now, the Panathenaic was actually originally constructed in the 4th century BCE by an Athenian statesman, Lycabettus, and it was designed to host the Panathenaic Games. And it hosted events like races and cultural competitions, and of course, athletic events that were linked to Athens' most important religious festivals. As you can see from the clip, the Olympic Stadium is actually built of this beautiful white marble, and it can actually host around 45,000 people. The Olympic Stadium was actually being prepared for a musical event that day, as you can see from the clips. And you can also find kind of the popular Olympic posters that we've seen over the last couple of years. Again, the sunset was so beautiful, and here you can see the Acropolis hill during sunset hours. I'm currently in the Panathenaic, which is the Olympic Stadium in Athens. You can kind of see the big rings behind me, and I'm obsessed with how the seats actually curve, and they look really, really cool. And I'm exhausted just walking up and down these steps, but it's really cool to actually visit this, and I'm really glad that I made time for it on my very short trip. They are planning for a concert at the moment, hence some of the things that you'll see in the video, like the speakers and the screens, so it's definitely a must-see. Now let's talk about the gem that is Mount Lycabettus. Here you can find the best panoramic views of Athens. You can see the Acropolis, the sea, and even the mountains in the distance on a clear day like the one that I had in this video. Now again, like the Acropolis, be prepared to walk in some comfy shoes, because at the summit you'll find kind of this 19th century chapel of St. George. It's also an open air theatre that has hosted international concerts. There's also a cafe and kind of seating areas for you to relax and enjoy the views once you do get to the top. Legend has it that the hill was actually created when the goddess of Athena accidentally dropped a massive rock she was carrying to build the Acropolis. It actually sits 277 meters above sea level, and it's the highest point in central Athens. Definitely got really lucky because I went on such a beautiful and clear day, and I got these beautiful shots of the entire city of Athens, and honestly it wasn't much of a crowd either. Let's talk about the area that I stayed in. I was only about 10-minute walk from a station called Omonia, and it was really helpful to get to kind of the Acropolis, and I stayed kind of near the Lycabettus hill. I will say that this area was actually really nice to kind of stay in because they had so many cool gems like bookshops, as well as this kind of really cool sandwich shop that you can see in the clip, as well as some really nice restaurants. I personally really liked the Airbnb that my friend found. I will be kind of open and honest and say that there were some kind of anti-tourist sentiment across some of the graffiti and artwork that we saw. So, you know, I think if I was ever to go to Athens again, I would definitely try and stay in a hotel, but definitely near a location like this where you can kind of really get exposure to the history and the artwork and the local residential areas. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll leave you again with this beautiful clip of a sunset from the Olympic Stadium. Thank you.